In a few moments, Nick's going to come forward and give a reflection on today's readings. Of course, this is his last Sunday with us, and certainly is sad to see him go. When he arrived back in February, it was during a very cold snap that we had. I think temperatures were probably hardly above 10 degrees for a week or so. So it was a very cold time, of course, snow, and things were pretty bleak outside. But then, of course, now, 6 months later, it's so very different right now. Certainly is a welcome change. I think Nick's presence for the last 6 months has also brought a welcome change for me, I think for all of us, in the sense that he shows us something very important, very, very fundamental to what we believe. And that's the fact that God is still very much at work in his people. He calls each one of us to a particular vocation in life. We all have certain opportunities and certain works that we have to do to help build up his kingdom. And to see this intelligent and talented young man discern God's call, think about the priesthood, spend years studying and, of course, being with us for the last 6 months, it really is a true sign that God really is at work, and he does call each one of us. We all have work to do for his kingdom. So Nick, I invite you to come forward to share some words about today's readings.
The first stage of wisdom in the Christian life is to recognize that we are nothing. And through recognizing that we are nothing, we start to discover that we are everything in the eyes of God. What a wild paradox that we experience in the spiritual life. Through knowing that we are nothing, we discover that we are everything? The real question then becomes, how do we come to the recognition that we are nothing? Because this is contrary to almost everything that society feeds us today. Our second reading from St. Paul to the Colossians shines light on this very reality. St. Paul tells us that we need to seek what is above, not what is here on earth. He says we need to put to death parts of ourself that are of the earth: immorality, impurity, passions, evil desires, and greed that leads to idolatry. The problem is that these things are so hard to die to, especially when our worth is caught up in material possessions. The parable in the gospel today shows us that. The rich man stored up all his treasures here on earth for himself, but as the Lord said, it is not the rich in what matters to God. So what does this mean? Is saving and storing money an evil thing? Of course not. We're called to be prudent with our finances. That is a good thing. But what Jesus is telling us today is that our worth and identity does not come from earthly things. Storing up treasures here on earth does absolutely nothing for our salvation. It actually can hinder it when we try to find our identity in it. When we look for our identity in the pleasures of the flesh, it starts to cloud how we really see ourselves. Our immorality, impurity, passion, evil desires, and greed start to be covered up by this fog of materialism. But when earthly pleasures are stripped away and our brokenness comes to the surface, we begin to realize that we are nothing on our own. We are a spiraling funnel that leads to sin and death. But brothers and sisters, the beautiful thing is that Jesus meets us in our brokenness and nothingness and says, I still love you. He hangs on the cross as a sign of how much we are worth. Our worth isn't defined by what we have, but it's defined by who God says we are. This process all starts by dying to the world, seeking what is above, and saying in confidence, I am nothing without you, Lord. And by meditating on the crucifixion and our spiritual poverty, we can start to hear Jesus say from the cross, this is how much you are worth to me. Friends, as my internship comes to a close, I just want to share with you a little bit about my experience here at Assumption. I've heard the seminary called a place to go and die, and I think this description is very accurate. Through the 8-year process, Jesus invites seminarians to die to themselves and live for others. This dying to self is, of course, not always pleasant and can be overwhelming at times. And if I'm being completely honest with you today, there were times in the seminary when I questioned, is this vocation going to be worth it? Will God satisfy all the desires of my heart living a celibate life in a parish? And I want to let all of you know that this internship has filled me with a resounding yes. As soon as I walked through the doors of Assumption, I felt like all of you were my family. I was embraced with open arms and loved as I am. The past 6 months, I have felt more alive than ever before in my life. I had the honor of laughing with you in the joys and crying with you in the sorrows and everything else in between. So from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you for making my internship what it was. Leaving Assumption, I feel more called to the priesthood than ever, and this parish has a big role to play in that confidence. So in conclusion, know of my continued prayers for all of you, and I just ask that you please continue to pray for me. God bless.